Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions. I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg, and I'm so excited. I have Liz Jorgensen and Nancy Jorgensen here today with me. Liz is an award-winning high school language arts teacher in Heartland, Wisconsin. She's also the author of a number of books, including Gwen Jorgenson's U.S. First Olympic Gold Medal Triathlete. And how do you say, is it Soji? Sozo?
Shijo,
Shijo.
Korean poetry. Yes.
Yes, Korean poetry, which I have to find out the backstory to that. Hacking Student Learning Habits and Go Gwen Go, A Family's Journey to Olympic Gold. Her work can also be found through the Harvard University, Story Monsters Inc., Edutopia, Teachers and Writers Magazine, and the English Journal. As if that wasn't impressive enough, Nancy Jorgensen is recently retired after 35 years of teaching choral music in Wisconsin. She co-authored Gwen Jorgenson's USA First Olympic Gold Medal Triathlete with her daughters Elizabeth and Gwen, and Go Gwen Go, A Family's Journey to Olympic Gold with her daughter Liz. Nancy is also the author of Things They Never Taught You in Choral Methods, which is hilarious, and From the Trenches, Real Insight from Real Choral Educators. They've both been featured with and without Gwen on a number of different podcasts and different episodes. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late to capitalize on Women's History Month, but nonetheless, it's still an important conversation to have. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining me. Nancy, I wanted to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your family and how you came to be the woman you are and raise the women you raised?
Well, that's a lot to cover. um, for most of my professional career, I was a high school choir director and dealt with lots of kids all the time. And so I was very busy. And in the middle of all that, I was raising two daughters. And I think they grew up watching me being a busy woman, doing a lot of work, but also spending a lot of time with them. I mean, they were a big priority. I went to all of Elizabeth's basketball games and orchestra concerts and all of Gwen's swim meets and track meets, and tried to prioritize that relationship with my girls and show them that they had a lot of possibilities and that hard work is a good thing. Awesome. And I think maybe that, that did bring us to this, where we all worked really hard on this most recent project.
Awesome. So were there some key, fundamental core values or beliefs that helped drive your own approach to working and raising children at the same time?
That's a hard one. And what made it really helpful was I had a great husband who did everything equally with me. We both cleaned the house. We both took the kids to parent conferences. We both took the kids to sports. And together, I think one of our overriding principles in raising the girls was that we both wanted them to do a sport and something in music, in the arts, and be attentive to their academic studies. And so that was kind of always the overriding goal. And we didn't really care what sport it was or how well they did, but we thought it would give them good friends and good skills for life. And then the music, kind of the same thing. We didn't really care what they did. They both ended up playing violin, but for the same reasons, something good to keep their time occupied and good people to hang out with.
Yeah. Liz, I want to bring you into the conversation so we can get that daughter perspective.
I remember mom and dad making a big deal about not quitting. Whatever you decide to sign up for, you're sticking with. And there's going to be times when you're not going to be happy with the coach or your teammates, or you're not going to want to go to practice, but that's not an option. I just remember mom and dad saying, think about carefully what you want to do, because you're committing for whatever it was, that season or that orchestra group. And that, I think, for me was a big core value or takeaway that I felt as a child.
That's awesome. It's funny because those are the things I did with my children. Like our house rule was you had to be in some kind of athletics, you had to play some kind of instrument, and once you started something, you finished it. Unless there was a like in some, a couple of cases there were reasons or there were justifications for quitting in the middle that that I could make with them because the harm that was being done to them in that space. But I think those are really key, important core values or perspectives that I think sometimes we're in this space, in this time, we might be teetering on, not necessarily privileging because of the history of privilege and the history of what how those come about. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right that I'm thinking of when I was in high school, my senior year, I got mono and it
Mhm.
was really bad. Like I didn't even have energy to shower and there was no way I could go to basketball practice. Like it
Yeah.
just was not an option. And so I remember having those conversations with mom and then with dad and with the coach as well. Like, I'm not quitting, I'm not, but how can we adjust to make sure that I'm fulfilling my responsibilities, but also doing what's best for my health and
Right.
wellness and,
Mhm.
allowing for situations, I think like you're alluding to, where it's unexpected. And when those things arise, no, I'm not quitting, but here's what we can do to still make it work.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. So we're here to talk about the book. So what did you find in your research about young adult nonfiction texts and stories about women and athletes?
Well, so my sister, Gwen,
Mhm.
she won the gold medal in the Rio Olympics in the triathlon. And after she did that, mom and I thought there was a story there to share with the
Mhm.
world. And we started with our first book and we wrote it together. And it was really our family's story of what happens when your sister or your daughter goes from just average Wisconsin girl to world and Olympic champion. Um, and then after that project was done, Gwen, she said to us, if you're going to do something next, I really want it to be for young people,
Mhm.
for maybe middle grade students. And I want them to see that, my path to success wasn't linear and that I dealt with a lot of disappointments and failures and challenges. Um, and so we thought, well, what could we do with this? And we did a bunch of research and we struggled to find comps. We struggled to find books for a middle grade audience about a female athlete.
Mm.
And we're like, where are they? And so we
Mhm.
thought that there was a hole there that we could begin to fill.
Mhm. Awesome. Go ahead. You're going to say something, Nathy?
Sure. Yeah. Kind of simultaneously, we were talking with friends who were teachers
Mhm.
and friends who were librarians and, kind of commiserating, gee, we just can't find any comps to suggest to a publisher that this would be something that people would buy. And they confirmed what we found. Teachers said, yeah, we don't have enough nonfiction on our shelves, and especially about female sports heroes. And the bookseller that we work with, she said the same thing. She confirmed it. And so sometimes it's hard to get a publisher's attention when you can't prove that, oh, there's lots of books out there and people buy this kind of book. We kind of went at it from the back door and we said, there aren't enough of these books. This is why we need to do that.
So, just out of curiosity, what was the publisher's response? Because often you hear if you don't have the comps and you don't have a an established audience, then there is nothing to quote unquote sell. But clearly, that's not the case in your case. So, how did you go from the beginning to the end? I guess.
I think that's a story about establishing good relationships, because we had written one book. We went to our original publisher and said, this is our idea. We think this is a good one. And because, she knew us, and I think it helped that we had a good relationship with her. And they do have a backlist of children's books. She was sold. Yeah, she thought it was a good idea.
Awesome, awesome. Um, Sorry. By sharing your story and Gwen's journey with the world, what do you hope will happen as a result?
Gosh, I'm an English teacher, and I hope a young kid picks up the book and they enjoy it. Like
Mhm.
that they see some of themselves in it, or they see what might be possible for them. And whether they want to be an athlete or a chef or a teacher or a doctor or an accountant or like I hope that they can learn something, but also just find pleasure in a
Mm,
book.
absolutely. How about you, Nancy? Same or?
Yeah, I would agree. There are, there are so many kids out there who either have a dream or maybe are afraid to dream.
Mhm.
They think I'm just somebody from this small town and I'll never get anywhere. And, the Olympics, that's kind of a different breed of being. I could never be an Olympian. And we want kids or adults to look at Gwen's story. She was just a kid from a small town in Wisconsin. And who would have thought? We didn't think that we were raising an Olympian.
Right. She was
And
never a state champion. She never went to the junior Olympic trials. She wasn't that very top athlete that you would think would go to the Olympics.
and another part of her story that I think I want people to see is that she was good when she was a kid, but she wasn't top. She didn't reach her full potential in grade school or high school or college. And I think some of us put ourselves on a timeline and we think we have to be successful at a certain point because everyone else is experiencing their success right now. And her success came later. And I just think that's a good lesson for all of us, that we have success in our future, and we just don't know when that might be. It might be in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, who knows?
Right.
And you might have to pivot. Like Gwen always wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, and that dream was not going to happen for her, but she was willing to listen to the people around her who said, you have a talent in something else. And so I think that that's another theme that we hope comes out for readers, that there are going to be people in your life who will see things in yourself that you're unable to see, and to listen to them and to follow those mentors and to really figure out what your potential is.
So really the three things I'm really hearing is, the narrative we tell ourselves is key to where we end up being. So when we see representation that we can identify with, that stretches our narrative for ourselves. The second thing I really heard was that perseverance, that you can still become, even when you're not becoming at some prescribed time. And that I loved what you said, Liz, about pivoting, because I think that's the thing in our society that's really the hardest part, is we get locked into this, it has to look this one way. But really, um, things come to us in different packages, and it's our ability to listen and pivot and really rewrite our own stories that help us bring it to all together.
Well, and I think that growth mindset, kind of that basketball story that I was telling before, that, I could have said, oh, this is terrible. It's my senior year. It's the worst thing that could ever happen. But instead I pivoted and I can be the best cheerleader. I can wave that towel still at the end of the bench. Like, it's not the way I wanted it to end, but you can still be part of, or you can see a different possibility for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Um, as advocates of having representative images and stories available to students and their families, how did that become so important to you as a value?
Well, Mom, when you were growing up, you could not
Right.
be in sports.
Right.
Right. I graduated from high school in 1972, the year that Title IX passed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the women, young girls after me had so many more opportunities. But when I was in high school, I could be a cheerleader, except that I wasn't popular enough to be a cheerleader. I could play, pick up softball in my neighborhood, but the boys kind of dominated that. And I kind of wasn't really interested in pickup softball games. When we played basketball in school, like in gym class, we only played half court. They didn't think girls could run a full court.
It's
And so,
unbelievable to me.
Actually, I had that experience in elementary school as well, as that we only ran half court. And I also went to a all girls Catholic high school in my first few years. And so that was part of my experience as well.
right. And so, I'm not sure if there had been representation, if I would have been an athlete, because my interests just go more towards music. But who knows? Given the choices I had, I gravitated to reading and playing piano and majored in music. So that might have happened anyway. But I think it is important for everybody to have that representation of all different kinds of possibilities. I should have known that I could be an athlete, and I didn't really know that.
Well, even think about triathlon. Like Gwen didn't even know what triathlon was. And you can't even imagine if you don't know it. And so, yeah.
Right. That brings to me this notion of how do you become what you don't know? And then how do you mentioned mentors earlier, the role that mentors play. So can you kind of illuminate for us kind of the role that folks played with Gwen and helping her, as well as the both of you, because I don't think any of us get to where we are by ourselves.
I was a senior on the track and field team, and my high school coach saw my sister in the gym doing some dry land when she was on the swim team. And he said to me, "Your sister's a runner." And I was like, "What? No, my sister's a swimmer. Like she's on the swim team." And he's like, "No, she's a runner." And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's not. She's a swimmer. And he saw in her this natural talent for running. And he was quite persistent. I remember he came over to the house and had dinner with us and just said to Gwen, "You've got this talent in running and you should really pursue it." And Gwen was reluctant at first, but our coach tried to make the deal a little sweet for her. He said, "You don't have to come to track and field practices. You can just come to meets. And, we've got these nice uniforms," and, just trying to convince her in some way. And he was also really cautious about my feelings too, because he could see that Gwen was going to surpass what I was capable of very quickly. And he nurtured that in me as well, like kind of preparing me for what was going to happen. And he was instrumental in Gwen's success. He got her to run track and field in high school. And then once Gwen went to college, she hadn't been running at Madison. She was just swimming. And then once her swim career ended, our high school coach came back in and said, "Gwen, remember, you're a good runner. I think you've got something still in you that you have not tapped. I think you should join the track and field team at the University of Wisconsin at Madison." And, she trusted him. And he was also really patient and encouraging and allowed her to believe in this talent that she didn't know she had.
Nice. That's awesome.
Who else are you thinking of, Mom?
Well, later on, Gwen graduated from Madison, and she had kind of tapped out her running career. Thought originally she might be a professional runner, but then that didn't work out. And so she took her CPA exam and was working as a CPA for Ernst & Young. And USA Triathlon was in the process of recruiting college graduates who were swimmers and runners. And so this woman, Barb Lindquist, who was head of the development program, came to her and said, "Gwen, you can swim and you can run, and maybe you should do triathlon." Well, when Gwen figured out that there was biking in it, she said, she just laughed at her. She says, I don't even have a bike. I've never ridden a road bike. I don't know how to clip in my feet on the pedals. I can't do that. But Barb became her mentor and found her a coach and sent her a bike and had faith in her. She said, "On paper, you have more potential than I had." And Barb was an Olympian herself. And so she, it's that she was the mentor, but it's again that pivot, from swimming to running to triathlon to thinking I have some talent inside me and I'm going to explore it.
As teachers, and this is a little bit off script, but as teachers, how do you see the role you play in the classroom as doing that same thing for the students you see?
Oh, we do it every day. I mean, I have kids in class who will write a poem, and I'll say to them, you are a poet. And they don't know. They have no idea how good they are. You know, and for me, right, I've been teaching for 18 years. I've read how many kids' poems, like you see these little gems. And I always say to kids, like, has anyone told you before? And sometimes they say yes. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you again, like, listen to those people. You have a talent. And a lot of times they'll say, no, no one's ever told me. And so then I'll try to point out like what they're doing that's effective, that's beyond what I'm seeing from their peers. And then also, what can be next? Okay, so you have this talent. What can we do to foster it? Do you want to write a little bit outside of class and share it with me? There's this writer group that I know of down the street. You could join that. Or I'm the advisor for writing club. Or what about the newspaper? Have you ever thought of joining the school newspaper? Like just giving them all of these options to help them to develop their talents. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And because we've been doing it for so many more years, I think that that's a huge part of my job is just identifying skills and then helping to build the confidence and then also the interest in growing those even more.
Right. Right. How about as a choir teacher?
I think there are so many similarities between writing and music. They're both in the arts. And, you know, I'm going to echo a lot of what Elizabeth just said, but I'm thinking of kids that, you know, when we had choirs, I would try to get away from the piano and wander among the rows and listen to kids. And, you know, I remember a couple of times I'd just turn to a kid and say, wow, you've got a beautiful voice. Never thinking that much about it. But then I would hear later that they went home and that comment like made their day and maybe made them confident enough to sing a solo. And then that same kid, you know, once they knew they had a talent or someone recognized it, I had several kids who got brave enough to sing a solo at a contest.
Nice.
And I remember this one mother who just sat there after her kids sang, just tears coming down her eyes. She says, I've never heard him sing. He's never sung for me. I had to come to this public performance to hear him. And, you know, I think the student didn't have the confidence even to sing for the parent. And just a little push gave them that boost to try out the skill. And it was a gift not only to him, but also to his parents. It was you know, emotional moments like that make it worth it.
Well, and I think, you know, we hear that.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I think that we hear that, you know, so many kids, they don't hear their name unless it's in a bad way.
Right.
And so just this being really conscious of what can I do to call the kid by their name and then give them a compliment, give them a boost. Like we know we're going to work harder for somebody that we like. We're going to work harder in things that we enjoy. And so trying to develop that relationship, that rapport, like Gwen's mentors and coaches did, and then also allow them to find joy and fun in it. Like, I'm not going to downgrade your poem. Like, just give me something that's fun and that you enjoy, and then let's talk about it.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, how do you build confidence, especially when people are have either, like in Gwen's case, like she tried track and that didn't work, and she tried swimming and that didn't work. She tried track and that didn't work. How does one build confidence even when it seems that you're failing or it seems that you're not making the mark? How did she push through that? And it sounds like mentoring was part of it, but what's the mental game that she had to play with herself?
I think she always is on a mission to find out what's inside of her. She, you know, when she kind of reached the end of swimming, she said, I know I have more talents in running and that I just haven't explored. And I don't know what I'll find. It might not be as much as I hoped. And it wasn't, you know, when she tried to do professional running and marathon, it wasn't as much as she hoped. But to have that mindset that I'm going to explore my talents to their potential and just see what I find. And then it's not what you find that's the end game. It's the journey. It's doing the exploration and making the friends and you know, making relationships with coaches and teammates. That's the payoff.
If we talk about parenting, though, I think that the growth mindset that both you and dad instilled in us and also modeled, like I remember you having conflicts at work and coming home and talking about not, this is terrible, everyone's against me. It wasn't that. It was instead, here's all the things I'm going to do to make it better. Here are all of the things that I can control tomorrow to rectify or to adjust what's happening. And I think that that was always, if I came home to mom with some sort of complaint about, oh, this teacher hates me and I didn't get the score I wanted, it wasn't pity. It was, what can you do about it? Where did the wheels fall off? What control do you have? What can we do tomorrow? And then following up, right? Like sending me off to school and then the next day saying, well, how did that conversation go? Or what progress did you make on the next paper? It was just always this looking at it through a growth mindset.
And I think a really important part of that is also understanding that you have a wealth of agency within yourself to do what you can control and to let go of the things that you can't control. Instead of focusing on those things, you focus on what you can possibly do and understand that that possibility can extend outward even when it doesn't necessarily feel that way in that moment. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, she definitely raised women who wanted to identify what they could control and then go out there and really try to maximize it.
That's awesome. We talked about Title IX a little bit, Nancy, but can you shed a little bit more light on how pivotal that was in creating a space for Gwen to do what she's done and also creating a way for you to promote that development, that athletic development, and that wider sense of possibility for your girls?
Yeah, I think even now, the point of Title IX was equality, making things equal for women. And we're not there yet. You look at women's basketball versus men's basketball at the professional level, you look at women's soccer, we have not really achieved it. And I read an article somewhere that said to really achieve full equality will take another 200 years. But, in pay and everything, it's just a long process. But huge strides have been made. And Gwen grew up thinking that she had all these options available to her. She, and Elizabeth as well. I mean, it was just out there. Do you want to play basketball? Okay, sign up for it. You want to play soccer? Sure, we'll do that. I remember we took a road trip out to Utah with the girls, long road trip from Wisconsin to Utah.
Yep, I'm familiar.
In a little Honda Civic. But we got there and I think Gwen was about 7 or 8 and she was doing these cartwheels in the yard. And she goes up to my husband's brother. We had traveled out there to see some family. And she looked his brother right in the eye and she said, "Can you do anything a girl can do?"
Oof.
And it said a lot about, she wasn't sure that men could do everything that women can do. And so, I think Title IX had something to do with that, there are models out there for women and the possibilities are visible. You can see all the things that are available.
What did Kenny say when Gwen said that to him?
I think he tried to do the cartwheel that she had modeled and did not do it very well. So
that's also my recollection of the story. And I remember Gwen struggled to say her R's. So it was like anything a girl can do. Like it was...
That's funny. So as educators, I'm sure you're hoping that teachers will use your book in their classrooms and even with their own families. How have you provided resources for educators and their families to do that work?
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Elizabeth.
one of my good friends is a curriculum instructor at a local district, and she works a lot with elementary and middle school teachers and students. And she helped us create an educator guide that has lessons and activities, and it's all linked to standards. And so if there is a educator or a coach, or like you were saying, a parent who wants to have some things to do, along with the text. That educator guide is free. It's available on our publisher's website. You can message us. We can send it to you. You're going to link it in the show notes as well.
Right.
And the book itself, we tried to make interactive. There are 2 timelines that are happening. And then in addition to that, there's these sidebars that give some technical information. So Mom was talking about clipping in on a bike. Well, a kid likely won't know what that means. And so we have these little sidebars that will explain that kind of technical information. And then there's also letters. Gwen writes letters to the reader and then encourages the reader to write back. And so some of the lesson plans in the guide encourage kids to do those things. Like how could you write a letter back to Gwen? What would that look like? And then actually encouraging them to send it through her social media channels.
So has she gotten any letters yet?
That's a good question. I haven't asked her.
I don't know either.
Oh,
That will
wow.
be on my to-do list to ask her.
Okay, because I mean, here's the thing. This generation of kiddos, I mean, starting I think with my kids are 26, 23, and 21, have had unprecedented access to other people outside of the home in the community. And so that's something they've grown up with. And it would be I would be surprised if she hasn't gotten at least some bites here and there from kiddos across the country and maybe even across the world, reaching out to say, hey, I read this book, or I know your story, and had some conversation with them.
She has promised to write back. And so that'll be a good accountability. If she has received some, I'm going to ask for the responses as well.
Right, right. Um, One of the things that, before we wrap up, one of the things I wanted to ask is, in all of this work, um, well, first thing, I'll ask this first. What's the next step? Because this is for middle readers. I still imagine like high school girls, particularly we understand that high school girls' confidence takes a big dive when they get to that level, and it takes a long time to build that back up. And right now, with so much coming at kids of all ages, and the complexity of our society in this moment, are you planning another project that will kind of talk to that, speak to that, that will position the story to address those kinds of current issues?
Well, I hope what's next is that, I think we find books often through word of mouth. You know someone who read a great book and they're like, oh, this book would be great for you. And so I think that that's part of what we're doing. We're just trying to say to people, this book's available. If you know someone who would be into it, please share it with them. I'm also thinking of a coach that we were talking to a couple of weeks ago who she said she picked up the book and she read it in like a day or two. And she loved that it was a fast read and that she took so much from it, even though it was such a quick read. And when we had mentioned it was for a middle grade audience, she said, oh, I had no idea. And so I think that, we've heard that as well, that even though we intended it for younger kids, that everyone can enjoy it. We're offering author talks. So if there's a group, like a sport team or a classroom, and they would like to hear about the writing process or publishing or whatever, we're offering that. People can just reach out to us via our websites and we can try and set something up.
Awesome.
What else is next, Mom?
I think you handled that really well. I think that's exactly what, but you know what? Just when we kind of come off a project and we're just doing the tail end of some of the promotion, sometimes you or I get an idea and you just never know.
Gwen has recently gone back to triathlon. And so her goal is to make the next Olympics.
Wow.
And so we're big into following her right now. And she just had a baby. And so how old is he now?
He's 5 months now.
Yeah. So spending time with, my nephews, her grandkids, that's first and foremost, I think, at the top of the list.
Right.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense. Just for my own curiosity, projects, how long did this project take from beginning to end? And what kind of things were involved in it? Because obviously, you have to coordinate and you have to meet and talk and those kinds of things.
I think we started in 2019 because that was when the book we had been working on previously was published. And then, Gwen really had this idea that we should do something for kids. And so we started after the publication of the first book, and this one was published in 2022. So it's a years long project. And Elizabeth and I did a lot of the writing, but Gwen, fact checked everything and told us some of the points and messages that she really wanted in the book. But we spent a lot of time on Google Docs going back and forth. And, we say now that when we go back and read it, I could not tell you who wrote which words. And it's just it was so seamless that I'd edit Elizabeth's words. She'd fix mine.
We did a lot of research. Mom pulled out artifacts, like projects like Gwen had worked on when she was in elementary school. We pulled out old photos and looked at them. A lot of our research, as we had mentioned, we're looking for comps, right? Reading books that were in this same realm. And one of the books that Mom found was about Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
And that book really was our inspiration in terms of the two timelines. And once we decided we wanted to do that, we had to go back into the manuscript and make a lot of changes and just a huge overhaul. And so in addition to working on Google Docs, Mom and I would meet probably once a week in person. And I remember when we reorganized the book, we put all of the chapters or the scenes on these note cards. And then we had all of the note cards laid out on the table. And then, well, maybe this should go here and maybe this should go here. And we were like rearranging them visually or physically so that then we could go back and have some clarity when we worked in the Google Docs. In the later stages, we got together and we read it out loud. And my partner and my dad, they would like listen to us read it and give us feedback. And then we had, as Mom was mentioning, right, Gwen would read it along the way, but then we also had other teachers who read the book for us and just gave us some tips like, oh, a kid might be confused here, or here's an activity that could go along with that section. And so, it was many, many years and it looked different in every stage, but it's a fun passion project. And then to be able to do it with my family, to have this with my mom and my sister, it's just, I think we tried, although it was stressful, I think we tried to enjoy it as much as we could.
I also signed up for a writer's workshop. There's a great, it's called All Writers in the town we live in Waukesha. And so there would be 6 to 8 people in the group, and we would all bring 3,500 words every week. We'd read each other's books. And I think I did that for enough sessions to get through the entire book twice. And so there were 8 readers reading this book. Some of them had no interest in athletics at all, but that was good. We wanted to know if somebody picked up this book, a parent, maybe reading it with their kid, what would they be thinking? And there were evenings where 6 people said the same thing. I don't get that section. What is this about clipping your feet on a pedal? And how could you possibly hop on a bike without shoes? And they would just say, I don't get it, which told me we had not explained it clearly enough. And so we would go back and fix those mistakes. And then I think that was also the impetus for us to reorganize those index cards. Because, at some point in that process, the readers and the writers said, you have lost me. You keep, going back and forth and I am lost. And so then we went back to our timeline and tried to figure it out so that, the average reader who knew nothing about triathlon could follow.
I'm also thinking we have a mentor, Lisa Weimer, who is an award-winning author. She wrote the book, The Assignment, it's also for middle grade or young adult readers. And Lisa offered to read our early drafts. And one of the things that she said is at the beginning, you need something emotional that's going to hook the readers. And that really propelled us to put in letters. And so the book opens with a letter, and over, people have told us that they really love the letters. And, I'm just so thankful that we had those people like the Writers Workshop, like Lisa, who could give us those insights to hopefully make, the book as good as it could be.
You had mentioned mentors, And we never got back to Elizabeth and I telling you who our mentors were, but I think all of these people that we're talking about were mentors. And, you think of the wise old person who gives you advice, and that's not always where you find your mentors. Sometimes they're in, this writers group of contemporaries. Sometimes they're in younger people. A lot of these people we're talking about are a lot younger than I am, with good advice.
Right. Sometimes they're your friends. I'm thinking of Emily Reddy, the curriculum instructor who spent many hours working with us on the book. They can be your peers.
Absolutely. Awesome. So before we wrap up, do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
I'm thankful you had us on. This was so fun, and I'm glad that we can share a little bit about our family and our projects. And if anyone is interested in learning more, please do reach out to us. We would love to collaborate or to share or to inspire or do whatever we can for your classroom or your needs.
Awesome.
I think you had great questions, and this was a really productive conversation, I think, on many levels. It wasn't just about sports or coaching or raising kids. It was, about the state of the country and rights and representation. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we silo these conversations and we only talk about the things that are the most comfortable, we miss a lot of opportunities. So I try to bring that to my conversations because it's something that I found has been really helpful for me to grow and change along my own professional path. So I appreciate your appreciation of that. So I will go ahead and close. This has been another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions, and I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg. Please feel free to like, share, or comment on this episode, and thank you all for listening.